Chapter 167 Fierce Battle 1. Since he was already exposed, there was no point in further hiding. Han Li took a deep breath. With the dazzling protective barrier activated and a magic tool in each hand, he walked away from behind the rock. "It's you." After he clearly saw Han Li's appearance, this senior martial brother Lu shouted with surprise. He actually recognized Han Li. Han Li was slightly startled by his shout, and his heart sunk a bit. This senior martial brother Lu had merely seen him once from that time on the hill in the midst of a chaotic fight. Several months had already passed and yet he actually still recognized him. Not only did this man have great memory, but he also had outstanding shrewdness and a careful mind. Regardless of the circumstances, Han Li could not consider this good news. In fact, he already faintly felt that the senior martial brother before him could be considered a similar kind of person as himself, equivalently merciless and good at scheming. The particular arrogance he showed off in front of others was absolutely a similar smokescreen like Han Li's low-key profile. However, Han Li had unexpectedly aroused another person's attention, while senior martial brother Lu was able to conceal his true colors, deliberately having others look upon him with scorn. Regardless, Han Li believed that he himself was incapable of being as shameless or as cruel and savage as him. From the beginning, he had only pursued his ordinary path of self-improvement. During the time that Han Li's heart was apprehensive, martial brother Lu's expression grew solemn. He seemed to have also come to some sort of realization and looked at Han Li with an ominous gaze, not concealing his killing intent in the slightest. Han Li let out a sigh. He originally wished to spout out a few misunderstandings and see whether he could fool him. But currently, seeing his appearance and knowing his shrewdness, he didn't have the slightest chance to deceive him. He was certain only one of them could be left alive. He shouldn't waste energy to create a misunderstanding, as he could not longer strike first and gain the upper hand. With this thought, Han Li remained silent and raised the fine steel ring in his left hand, producing a strange whistle. It then charged straight toward senior martial brother Lu. Soon after, the dark green gourd in his right hand lit up, and 5 or 6 dark indistinct spheres spouted from its mouth and followed after the steel ring. Han Li was not done, however. He made a slight gesture with his empty left hand, and several red fireballs appeared in an instant. He slightly moved his sleeve and lined up the fireballs. He then suddenly threw them toward senior martial brother Lu, whispering the word, "Go." Carrying a blazing hot chi, the fireballs separated into 4 different directions like a swarm of bees and attacked senior martial brother Lu from distinct angles. In this move, Han Li had nearly utilized all of his previously acquired magic tools. He didn't use the treasure talisman in an all-out attack, since it would have been made complicated by the fireball's movement. In addition, it would have wasted the great effort Han Li put into learning this technique from Lu Feng as an instant kill move against an unprepared opponent. Actually, if Han Li had been familiar with the new magic tools and could have quickly mastered them, he would have already used all of them at an earlier time without restraint. After all, the strength of his new magic tools was far greater than that of his old magic tools. However, senior martial brother Lu did not remain idle while Han Li acted. He brought out a large azure flag on a pole about a zhang long. The banner had a long clawed, dancing, ferocious azure flood dragon embroidered in an azure light. At this time, senior martial brother Lu saw Han Li's successive attacks and was surprised. He couldn't help but be extremely flustered. The reason why he brought out his most powerful magic tool, the Azure Flood Dragon banner, was because he thought similarly to Han Li. He wanted to kill him immediately to silence him. But he absolutely didn't expect Han Li to unleash an overbearing attack as soon as he appeared without saying even a word. Furthermore, his attack was vicious, with an indomitable intent. With no better option, senior martial brother Lu decided against launching an assault and passed the Azure banner to his right hand. Then he moved his left hand toward the storage pouch from his waist and took out a yellow talisman. He looked at the high-grade talisman with reluctance before clenching his teeth and threw it in front of him, rapidly muttering to himself. In an instant later, Han Li's steel ring was letting out a faint yellow light. It was not far from Senior Marshal Brother Lu and was about to pound against him. Senior Marshal Brother Lu pointed at the yellow talisman with his free hand and loudly shouted, "Wind Wall Technique, rise." Following that loud shout, the yellow talisman turned into a white hurricane over 10 jong tall. It stood in front of Senior Marshal Brother Lu, obstructing the path of the steel ring. Pooh! The steel ring penetrated into the hurricane but was immediately blown side to side. After rotating several times, it was suddenly flung back. As for the spheres that arrived soon after, they were even more useless, only capable of revolving outside the hurricane. They didn't even have the ability to enter the gale. Seeing these circumstances, Han Li's complexion slightly changed. He hastily pointed to the fireballs and immediately turned them into 2 huge crescents, agilely attempting to flying off in 2 directions in a futile attempt to further attack Senior Marshal Brother Lu. He beautifully thought. Senior Marshal Brother Lu coldly laughed. With an extremely skilled, one-handed incantation gesture, he pointed to the center of the wind wall, causing the hurricane to separate into 2. They separated extremely quickly and once again obstructed the fireballs. Peng peng. Several sounds of explosions rang. The fireballs were unable to evade once more and could only meet against the wind wall. The hurricane trembled several times, swallowing up the fireballs and causing them to disappear without a trace. Han Li felt overwhelmed with shock. At this moment, under Senior Marshal Brother Lu's control, the 2 hurricanes turned back into 1. Such a minor talent dares to show off his incompetence. Although I know neither the name nor the origin of Junior Marshal Disciple, tonight your death is certain. Senior Marshal Lu said with a savage smile. Soon after, he only saw his hands meet, holding the Azure Flood Dragon banner once more and waving it with all his might. Han Li was somewhat nervous since his opponent was far more troublesome than he expected. Such a swift and fierce chain of attacks had actually been so effortlessly dealt with. Although the opponent waved that banner, nothing unusual had yet to happen, but from looking at the opponent's imposing appearance, he knew that this Senior Brother Lu's counterattack would absolutely be nothing to scoff at. It seems I have no choice but to use the talisman treasure, Han Li coldly thought. However, he was currently unable to make full use of the talisman treasure with a condensation technique. As a result, every time he used the talisman treasure, he would need to fight for a certain amount of time to execute the spell that would propel the talisman treasure to vanquish the enemy. For this reason, his defense must be absolute. With this thought, Han Li took a look at his opponent. He only saw Senior Marshal Brother Lu waving his azure banner. The banner gradually grew brighter and started emitting a blinding azure light, causing the Azure Flood Dragon to become even more sinister and frightening. It seemed the opponent was on the verge of starting his assault. Han Li no longer hesitated and moved his hand. Hoo! The ring flew back and stopped several feet away above his head and began to hover above. Grow! With this soft shout, the steel ring let out a large yellow light and hurriedly expanded. It stopped growing larger when it reached the size of a small table. Fall! That steel ring obediently fell with Han Li at the center of the circle. Then it began to swivel around, forming a large protective barrier. Han Li hadn't stopped there. After he put away the gourd, he took out his newly acquired shield as an offering. It grew several times larger outside the blue light barrier and softly floated in front of him, emitting a black light. Like that, Han Li had 3 layers of defense. His outermost layer was the large and fine steel ring. In the middle was the flying dark iron shield. The innermost layer was the blue light barrier he had used at the very beginning.